Good day, classmates. This is another presentation for ENM 226, or the legal aspects of engineering management, and it tackles pertinent provisions of the Philippine Civil Code which covers underlying stipulations about properties, obligation and contracts, and etc. My name is Engineer Joseph Paulo A. Geronimo, and as we all know, the Philippine Civil Code may not be directly applicable to every aspect of an engineering manager's daily tasks, but it holds underlying importance in several areas, such as contracts and agreements, intellectual property rights, product liability, labor law principles, and conflict resolution. So the Philippine Civil Code provides engineering managers with a background understanding of legal principles that can indirectly impact their work. It allows them to make more informed decisions, navigate contractual obligations, and mitigate potential legal risks in various aspects of project management. So to start, for the second half of the pertinent provisions of the Philippine Civil Code, as continuation from the first half earlier discussed, we have Chapter 4, which covers provisions common to testate and intestate successions. So this chapter outlines legal principles that apply to both situations where a person dies with a will or the testate and without a will or intestate. So for heirs, they're cited Article 777, which defines who are considered heirs, and then followed by Article 787, which establishes the order of a succession specifying who inherits if no will exists. So for representation, they're cited Article 846, which defines the concept of representation, which allows descendants to take the place of a deceased parent or grandparent and inherit their share. So they're also cited the concept of accretion, which occurs when a co-heir repudiates or refuses their inheritance or is disqualified, cited under Article 857. And then we have collation, which Article 885 further requires a descendant who received donation during the lifetime of the deceased to contribute a portion of that inheritance back to the estate for equal distribution among all heirs. And then we have for debts and expenses under Article 878 specifies that the descendants' debts and funeral expenses must be paid before the inheritance is distributed to the heirs. Next one, for the executors and administrators, Article 1003 defines the roles of executors, or those who are appointed in the will, and administrators, or those who are appointed by the court in the absence of a will, who are responsible for managing the estate, paying debts, and distributing the remaining inheritance to the heirs. So the prescription of heir rights, further cited under Article 1103, that establishes the time frame for heirs to claim their inheritance, and generally they have 10 years from the time the will is probated or the administrator is appointed. So this chapter further provides a general framework. Specific rules regarding inheritance, shares, disqualifications, and other nuances might be further elaborated upon in subsequent chapters dealing with the testate and intestate succession. The Philippine Civil Code allows for testamentary freedom, meaning a person can create a will or distribute their property as they wish, as long as it does not violate mandatory heir rights or legitimacy. Then this chapter 4 also lays the groundwork for inheritance law in the Philippines by establishing common principles applicable to both testate and intestate succession. Understanding these provisions is crucial for individuals planning their estates, as well as for heirs navigating the legal process of claiming inheritance. So this might be somewhat far from the concepts of engineering managers' daily tasks, but to some cases, it is also um, the engineering managers might also encounter some of these legal provisions. They're cited under the Philippine Civil Code. So moving forward, we have Title 5 or the prescription. So Title 5 of the Philippine Civil Code focuses on prescription, which refers to the extinction of a right or action due to the lapse of time. So there are two types of prescription cited under the Philippine Civil Code. First is the acquisitive prescription under Articles 1104 to 1140, which defines the acquisition of ownership over a property by someone who has possessed it for a certain period of time under specific conditions. So under acquisitive prescription, there are two main types. The ordinary acquisitive prescription, which requires possession in good faith and with just title or belief of ownership for 10 years for movable property and then 20 years for immovable property such as land and buildings. And then we have extraordinary acquisitive prescription, which requires uninterrupted adverse possession for 30 years without the need for good faith or just title. So the other type of prescription is the extinctive prescription under Articles 1141 to 1151, further referring to the loss of the right to file a lawsuit or enforce a claim due to the passage of time. So the specific time frame for extinction varies depending on the nature of the right or action. So some of the examples are 4 years for breach of contract or obligation, 10 years for recovery of property obtained through a fraud or mistake, and 30 years for mortgage foreclosure actions. And then we have here some key considerations under Title 5 or prescription, like interruption of prescription, which Article 1154 states that certain actions like filing a lawsuit or acknowledging the debt can interrupt the prescription period and restart the clock. Then we have also the suspension of prescription, which Article 1155 states that prescription might be suspended in certain situations such as during the minority or under 18 of age or insanity of the person who has the right to sue. And then we have renunciation of prescription, which Article 1156 states that a person entitled to invoke prescription can choose to waive this right and still pursue a lawsuit. Next is the importance for different parties. Now, for property or owners, understanding acquisitive prescription can help protect ownership rights if someone has been wrongly occupying their property for an extended period. And for creditors, knowing the time limits for enforcing debts through lawsuits is crucial to avoid losing the right to collect. And then for debtors, being aware of prescription periods can be advantageous if a creditor fails to take legal action within the allotted time frame. Moving forward, we have Book 4, citing provisions for obligations and contracts. As we all know, engineering projects often involve contracts with suppliers, contractors, and clients. So the Philippine Civil Code provides legal framework for these contracts, outlining principles of obligations, breach of contract, and remedies. Understanding these principles allows engineering managers to negotiate and draft stronger contracts, identify potential risks and areas of liability, and handle contract disputes for more effective and efficient project implementation. So to begin with, we have Title 1, citing provisions for obligations. So the Title 1 of the Book 4 of the Philippine Civil Code lays the foundation for understanding obligations and contracts in the Philippines, more importantly relevant to engineering managers who administer and encounter engineering projects that involves contract with contractors, suppliers, and their clients. So Article 1156 stated the concept of obligation as a legal tie that binds a person or the obliger to give, do, or not do something in favor of another or the obligee. There followed the Article 1157, which enumerated the sources of obligations, further declaring the obligations that arise from various sources, including the law, which further requires certain obligations mandated by the law itself, such as the payment of taxes, contracts that are agreements between parties creating obligations to fulfill the agreed upon terms, quasi-contracts which are lawful non-contractual obligations that arise from fairness and equity, like someone managing another's property without consent, the acts or omissions punished by law, which are acts that violate the law and cause harm, creating obligations to compensate the injured party, and the quasi-delicts that are defined as the acts that do not violate a law but cause harm through negligence, imprudence, or lack of skill, that also creates obligations to compensate the injured party. So next we have the general characteristics of obligations under Articles 1158 to 1161, comprising of the obligations derived from law, which are not presumed and only those expressly stated in the code or special laws are enforceable. Next we have obligations arising from contracts, which having the force of law between the contracting parties must be complied with in good faith. The third one is the obligations derived from quasi-contracts governed by specific provisions within the code. And the last one, we have civil obligations arising from criminal offenses which are governed by penal laws, but the civil code also provides for compensation to the injured party. The next concept is the performance of obligations under Articles 1163 to 1232, which further outlines principles related to fulfilling obligations such as the place of performance, the time of performance, who can perform the obligation, payment and delivery, modes of extinguishing obligations such as payment, performance, and remission of debt. So, having this basic overview of the Title I or obligations offers a more comprehensive discussion with specific articles addressing various aspects of obligations. Understanding these principles is crucial for anyone, such as the mostly engineering managers involved in contracts or other legal relationships in the Philippines. So moving forward, we have Title 2 of the Book 4, which delves into the world of contracts within the Philippine Civil Code. So to provide a summary within the concept of a contract under 1306, a contract is a meeting of minds between two persons whereby one binds himself with respect to the other to give something or to render some service. Essentially, it is a legally enforceable agreement between parties. Next one, we have elements of a contract under Article 1318, which further declares that a valid contract requires the presence of all these elements. The first one, we have consent of the contracting parties, which means both parties agreed to the terms freely without undue influence, intimidation, or mistake. Second one, we have object certain, which is licit or lawful. The subject matter of the contract must be clear, definite, and within the bounds of law. Then the last one we have the cause which is lawful. So the reason or motive behind the contract must also be legal and not contrary to good morals or public order. Moving further under Title II contracts, which engineering managers must be aware of and must take into consideration, is the capacity to contract under Article 1327 to 1330, further stating that minors, incapacitated persons, and those disqualified by law may not be able to enter into binding contracts. Then we have the kinds of contracts as stated under Articles 1343 to 1421, which the Philippine Civil Code classifies as contracts based on the various criteria, including the form, which can be verbal or oral, or written contracts, that certain contracts require a written form to be valid. Consideration, which can be onerous contracts which involve exchange of something of value, or gratuitous contracts which one party benefits without giving anything in return. And in terms of manner of entering into the contract, which can be bilateral or both parties express consent, or can be unilateral which only one party expresses consent. Next, we have the effects of contracts under Articles 1319 to 1321. So, valid contracts have the force of law between the contracting parties and should be complied with in good faith. So, the extinction of contracts under Articles 1233 to 1247 covers way in which contracts can be extinguished or terminated, including payment or performance, loss, destruction, or impossibility of the subject, mutual rescission, novation or replacing an old contract with a new one, and frustration of contract when unforeseen circumstances make fulfilling the contract impossible. So, the Civil Code offers a more detailed discussion with specific articles addressing various types of contracts, their formation, and legal implications. However, understanding these principles is crucial for engineering managers entering into contracts in the Philippines. Always remember that for complex contracts, consulting the right um, legal advisor or lawyer is always recommended. Next one, we have the Title 3 or the Natural Obligation. So the Title 3 of the Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code dives into the concept of natural obligations. These obligations differ from the more commonly known as civil obligations in that they are not enforceable by law. So to further discuss, we have the definition under Article 1423, which states that natural obligations are those arising from equity and natural law without force of law to compel their performance. So in simpler terms, they are moral duties someone feels compelled to fulfill even though there's no legal obligation to do so. So for example, under Article 1424 to 1426, the Civil Code provides some examples of situations that create natural obligations, such as paying a debt that has become unenforceable due to the expiration of the legal time frame to sue, and then a third party without the knowledge or consent of the debtor pays a debt that is no longer legally enforceable. So if the debtor later voluntarily reimburses the third party, this fulfills a natural obligation. So another concept is the voluntary fulfillment under Article 1423, which further states that if someone chooses to fulfill a natural obligation, the law protects them from reclaiming what they have delivered or the value of the service rendered. Another concept is distinguishing natural obligations from civil obligations. As earlier said, enforceability is the key difference lies in enforceability. So civil obligations can be enforced by law through lawsuits, while natural obligations cannot. Then in terms of the source, civil obligations arise from contract laws or quasi-contracts, which are actions resembling contracts with legal consequences, unlike natural obligations that arise from a sense of fairness and morality. So the next one, we shall tackle about the significance of natural obligations. So in terms of ethical framework, it states that natural obligations promote ethical behavior within society. Fulfilling them demonstrates good character and a sense of fairness even when there's no legal compulsion. Then in terms of influence on law, while not directly enforceable, natural obligations can sometimes influence court decisions, particularly in cases where the law might seem harsh or unfair. Then the last one is the moral compass, which entails the understanding natural obligations being a guide to individuals in making ethical decisions even when the law is silent on the matter. So the Title 3 of the Civil Code sheds light on the concept of natural obligations in the Philippines. Though not enforceable by law, they play a crucial role in promoting ethical conduct and a sense of fairness within the society. So by understanding both civil and natural obligations, individuals, or more importantly, engineering managers can navigate their legal and moral responsibility more effectively. So the next provision that we shall be discussing about is under Title 4, Estoppel. So Title 4 of the Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code deals with estoppel, which is a legal doctrine that prevents a person from denying or acting inconsistently with their previous statements or actions, if such denial or inconsistency would prejudice another person who relied them in good faith. So we have here elements of estoppel, which comprises of representation, further stating that there must be a clear and definite representation either by words or conduct made by one party or the one person being estopped. And then we have reliance, the other party or the relying party that must have acted in good faith and relied on the representation. Then the third element is the prejudice. The relying party would suffer prejudice or injury if the representation is denied. So the next concept we shall be discussing is the types of estoppel, which is the first one involves estoppel in pies or equitable estoppel under Article 1431, which is the most common type of estoppel that arises from the conduct or representations of a party rather than a formal written document. And then we have estoppel by deed under Article 1434, which is a form of estoppel that arises when a person conveys ownership of property they don't legally own, but later acquires the title. In such cases, the title automatically passes to the recipient upon acquisition. So Title 4 on estoppel in the Civil Code serves as a safeguard against misleading statements and actions in contracts and other legal relationships, most importantly to engineering managers entering the involvement of this type of case towards their projects that they are implementing. So by understanding this doctrine, engineering managers, together with their businesses, can navigate their dealings with greater confidence and fairness. However, it is important to consult with a lawyer for a specific legal advice regarding the applicability of estoppel in a particular situation. So the next one we shall be tackling is the Title 4 under Title 5, Trusts. So as defined by the Philippine Civil Code, trust is a legal relationship where one person or the trustor transfers ownership or of property or assets to another person or the trustee to hold and manage that property for the benefit of a third person or the one called being the beneficiary or a specific purpose. We have the types of trust under the Philippine Civil Code comprising the express trust under Article 1441, which are created by the deliberate and explicit intention of the trustor, typically outlined in a written document called as the trust deed. Then we have implied trusts also under Article 1441, which arise by operation of law, even if not expressly stated by the trustor. They can be further categorized as the resulting trust under Article 1448, which occur when the property ends up in the hands of a trustee who was not intended to be beneficial owner, and constructive trusts under Article 1447, which are imposed by the courts to prevent unjust enrichment. So these arise when a trustee acquires property through fraud, mistake, or a wrongful act. So the Title 5 or the trust of the Civil Code provides a framework for trust in the Philippines. So understanding the concept, most importantly also, again, to engineering managers can be beneficial for individuals and families who want to manage their assets effectively, plan for the future, and potentially safeguard their wealth. So consulting again with a lawyer is essential for creating a valid trust that meets the specific needs and complies with the legal requirements. So Title 6 of the Philippine Civil Code talks about sales. So Title 6 of the Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code dives into the concept of sales, which is a fundamental agreement in commercial transactions. They're cited the elements of a contract of a sale, so which comprises of the consent of the parties under Article 1318, from which both the seller or the transferring ownership and the buyer or the acquiring ownership must freely agree to the terms of the sale. And then the second one, we have the object, or under Article 1458, from which the subject of the sale must be a determinate or a generic thing that is identifiable or belonging to a particular class. However, services are generally not covered under Title 6 on sales, but separate provisions might apply depending on the nature of the service. Then the third one, we have the price certain in money or its equivalent, also under Article 1458, further stating that there must be a specific price agreed upon which can be paid in money or something considered its equivalent like barter. Moving forward, we have the concept also of its types, or the types of sale consists of the sale of specific goods under Article 1460, which defined as the object being clearly identified and distinguished from all others of the same class. For example, selling a specific car with a particular model and serial number. And then we have sale of generic goods, or under Article 1461, which declares that objects belong to a specific class or category but not individually identified, like selling 100 bags of rice without specifying a particular brand or batch. And then the third one is the sale of future things, under Article 1462, that states that the object does not yet exist at the time of the sale agreement but is expected to come into the existence in the future, like pre-selling a house or a building that is still under construction. So we have also here obligations of the seller, which covers the delivery of the things sold under Article 1463, from which the seller is obligated to deliver the object of the sale to the buyer at the agreed upon time and place. So we have also warranty against hidden defects under Article 1565, that the seller is generally responsible for any hidden defects in the objects sold, unless they were expressly excluded in the agreement or the buyer was aware of them prior to the mutual agreement or the sale process. Then we have also the obligations of the buyer. So payment of the price under Article 1466 states that the buyer is obligated to pay the agreed upon price at the stipulated time and place. There is also a risk of loss under Article 1505, which outlines the transfer of risk associated with the object sold. So generally, the risk of loss or damage passes to the buyer upon the delivery, except in specific situations like fraud or delay in delivery cost by the seller. So the next concept under Title 6 sale is the rescission of the contract. So the breach of contract is tells that either party can rescind the contract if the party or the other party breaches a fundamental obligation, like when a seller fails to deliver or the buyer fails to pay. So the Title 6 of the Civil Code establishes a clear legal framework for sales transactions in the Philippines. Also relating to engineering managers involved into sales transaction. So understanding these provisions is crucial for both buyers and sellers to ensure their rights and obligations are protected. Yet again, consulting with a lawyer is advisable for complex sales agreements or situations where legal disputes might arise. So as being mentioned earlier, the Title 7 presents more concepts and pertinent provisions about barter or exchange. So Title 7 of the Book 4 of the Civil Code of the Philippines focuses on the concept of barter or exchange, which is a fundamental agreement in commerce predating currency. So to provide a concise breakdown under the Philippine Civil Code, we have contract formation, which under Article 1638 further defines barter contract that arises when one party agrees to give a specific thing in exchange for another party's promise to give a different thing. So the obligations further requires delivering the promised items under Article 1638, from which both parties are obligated to deliver the things they promised in exchange, and warranty against defective items again under Article 1639, where someone or if someone receives an item in barter that doesn't belong to the giver, they can refuse to deliver their promised items and seek damages. So the next concept is the eviction or loss of possession, comprising recovery and compensation under Article 1640, that if someone loses possession or eviction of an item received through barter due to a lack of ownership by the giver, they can reclaim the item they give in exchange and potentially seek damages. And the second one is the right to choose remedy, from which a person who loses possession can either recover their original item or just seek compensation for its loss. So, moving forward to another concept is the Title 8, which is the lease. So, Title 8 of the Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code governs lease agreements. So, this is also relevant to those lease agreements entered by engineering managers that involves granting temporary possession and use of property in exchange for rent. So, elements of a lease contract comprises the consent on parties, again, under Article 1403, from which a landlord or lessor and lessee or the tenant must freely agree to the terms of the lease. So another one is the object under Article 1642, from which the subject of the lease must be immovable property, whether land or buildings. Leasing movable property might fall under different legal provisions. So the rent under Article 1643 provided that a specific price or the rent must be agreed upon payable by the lessee to the lessor at stipulated intervals, whether monthly or quarterly or semi-annually or annually, depending on the terms they have agreed upon. So landlord's obligations or the lessor deli consist of delivering the leased property under Article 1654, to which the landlord must deliver the property to the lessee in a condition suitable for the intended use. So another obligation of the landlord or the lessor is to make necessary repairs that under Article 1654, it declares that the landlord is generally responsible for making repairs necessary to keep the property usable unless otherwise agreed upon in the contract. So likewise, if the lessee is also aware of the current issues and certain conditions of the property, and they both agreed upon to and to still enter into a lease contract, so that shall prevail under legal terms. So under lessee's obligation also consists of paying rent. So Article 1655 states that the lessee must pay rent on time and according to agreed upon schedule. So additionally, they should also take care of the property. That Article 1657 states that their duty is to care for the leased property with reasonable diligence and avoiding damage. And also, lastly, they should also return the property under Article 1658 upon lease termination, that the lessee must return the property to the landlord in the same condition that it was received, except for normal wear and tear. So unless they should settle certain negotiations or or penalties or sanctions depending on their terms once they have violated the terms that under this contract agreement. So the sublease assignment. So sublease under Article 1650 further states that the lessee may, with the lessor's consent, sublease the entire property or a portion of it to another person or sublessee. Moreover, the assignment of lease under Article 1649 states that the lessee can generally assign their rights and obligations under the lease to another person unless the contract explicitly prohibits it. Then we shall go to the termination of lease. So, the end of lease term under Article 1673 declares that the lease automatically terminates upon the expiry of the agreed upon lease term. And then, as earlier said, that once the lessee has violated certain terms within their lease contract, they might go into the they might commit the breach of contract, from which a material breach of contract by either party can lead to an early termination of the lease. So, in conclusion, this Title 8 or the lease provides a foundation for lease agreements in the Philippines. So, more importantly, to engineering managers who might be entering into a lease contracts towards administering their construction firms or companies towards a certain property owned by the landlord or the lessor. So, ensuring a balanced and legally sound framework for both lessors and lessees. So, yet again, it is important to consult with a lawyer for complex lease agreements for situations where legal disputes might arise within certain processes and upon the effectivity of the lease contract agreement. Next, we shall go to Title 9, which provides stipulations concerning partnership. So, Title 9 of the Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code deals with partnership, which termed as a legal relationship where two or more persons or partners contribute money, property, or industry or labor to a common fund within the intention of sharing profits. So this might termed also as those entering into a joint venture, but not necessarily similar to the first earlier discussed. So under provisions relating to partnership is its formation, that under Article 1767, a partnership is established through a contract between partners. While not mandatory, a written agreement outlining the rights and obligations of each partner is highly recommended. Then we have the lawful object and purpose. So under Article 1770, the partnership's purpose and activities must be legal and beneficial to the partners. Then we have also types of partnerships, to which consist of general partnership under Article 1818, stating that all partners are liable for the partnership's obligations up to the extent of their contributions and even their personal assets in some cases. Then the second one is the limited partnership under Article 1828, that on the other hand, there are two types of partners. The one, general partners, to which practice unlimited liability, and the limited partners to which emulate liability limited to their contribution. Next, we have partner contributions. So, synthesizing this concept under partnership entails the concerns and issues about monetary contributions that under Article 1776, partners can contribute money to the partnership pool. Hence, they can also um, practice contribution of property under Article 1777, that ownership of property can be transferred to the partnership or the right to use the property can be contributed. Then last, we have also contribution of industry under Article 1778, to which states that partners can contribute their skills, labors, or expertise to the partnership. Then under also within the provisions of Title 9 or the partnership, there cited the sharing of profits and losses under Article 1800, to which further states that profits and losses are generally shared by partners in proportion to their contributions, unless otherwise agreed upon in the partnership contract. Then throughout the management and administration, all partners under Article 1814 practices that in the absence of an agreement to the contrary, all partners have equal rights in managing the partnership. Then the designation of the managing partners concerns about the partnership agreement that can designate specific partners to handle management responsibilities. So now we shall now go to dissolution and liquidation. So specified causes under Article 1826 provides that the partnership dissolves upon the occurrence of certain events such as death, insolvency, or withdrawal of a partner. On the other hand, they can also um, delve into a mutual agreement where partners can agree to dissolve the partnership anytime. So, what is the importance of the Title 9 or having these provisions under partnership matters? So, first, it provides a legal framework for establishing and operating partnerships in the Philippines. Then second one, it provides clarity of rights and obligations that understanding these provisions helps partners define their roles, profit sharing arrangements, and potential liabilities. Now, in essence, the Title 9 offers a roadmap for forming and managing partnerships, promoting collaboration and business ventures while establishing clear legal guidelines for all partners involved. Yet again, consulting with lawyers is advisable to ensure a well-drafted partnership agreement and navigate any legal complexities that might arise along the partnership agreement. Next, we shall now go to the Title 10 of the Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code, which dives into the concept of agency, termed as a legal relationship where one person, which is the principal, authorizes another person, which is the agent, to act on their behalf in dealings with third parties. So the key breakdown of this concept consists of the elements of an agency, to which Article 1868 provides that the contract to which an agency relationship is typically established through a administration of a contract, which can be expressed, written or oral, or implied, being inferred from a conduct. Next is through authorization, which the principal grants the agent to the authority to act on their behalf. This authorization can be general, covering a broad range of actions, or specific, limited to a particular transaction. Next, we shall now be discussing about types of the agencies. So we have express agency under Article 1868, to which further defined as the principal clearly communicating their authorization to the agent and potentially to third parties. We have also implied agency under Article 1869, to which the agency relationship is implied from the principal's conduct even if not explicitly stated. Next one, we have gratuitous agency under Article 1869, stating that the agent does not receive any compensation for their services. Then the last one, we have compensated agency under Article 1869, to which in this type of agency, the agent receives compensation for their services. Next, we go to the obligations of the agent. So, he or she is obliged to follow instructions as being cited under Article 1871, to which the agent must act in accordance with the principal's instructions and within the scope of their authority. He or she must exudes loyalty and good faith under Article 1881, that the agent must act in the best interest of the principal and avoid conflicts of interest. And also, he or she shall account for receipts and disbursement, that under Article 1889, the agent must keep proper records and account for all money or property received and spent while acting on behalf of the principal. So, what are then the um, obligations of the principal? So, the principal must pay the agreed upon fee to the agent as being cited under compensation of the Article 1902. He or she must also reimburse the agent for reasonable expenses incurred while acting within the scope of their authority. So, as being cited under Article 1903 concerning the reimbursement. Next, we have also the termination of agency. So, this comprises of the completion of task under Article 1920, that the agency can terminate when the task for which the agent um, was appointed is completed. Then we have the revocation by the principal under Article 1920, that the principal can revoke the agent's authority at any time. Then follows the renunciation by agent, also under Article 1920, that the agent can renounce their agency at any time. Then the last one is the death of either party, also under Article 1920, further declaring that the death of either the principal or the agent can terminate the agency. So what is the importance of this Title 10? That explains and provides provisions for establishing an agency. So first, it facilitates business transactions. That agency allows individuals and businesses to act through authorized representatives, expanding their reach and capabilities. Then it also clear expectations, that understanding these provisions helps define the rights and obligations of both principals and agents, promoting clear of expectations and minimizing potential conflicts. So in conclusion, Title 10 of the Civil Code provides a legal framework for agency relationships in the Philippines. So these frameworks ensure um, accountability and protects the interests of both the principal and the agent. Yet again, consulting again with the legal advisor or a lawyer is recommended for complex agency arrangements or situations where legal disputes might arise, just as relevant as to those processes administered by engineering managers throughout throughout project implementation or other relevant relevant case pertaining to establishing an agency. So the Philippine Civil Code also provides provisions concerning um, administration of a loan, that under Title 11 of the Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code, stipulations focuses on the concept of a loan, being it a contract that involves the delivery of something from one party, the lender, to another party, the borrower, with the expectation that the borrower will return the same thing or its equivalent at a later date. So here's the breakdown of the key points that also engineering managers must be aware of pertaining to loan. So we have types of loans. Under Article 1933, the commodidatum is a gratuitous loan of a non-consumable item, something that can be used repeatedly without being used up. So the borrower must return the same identical item after using it for a specific purpose or a reasonable period. Then we have a simple loan or mutuum under Article 1933, which involves lending money or other consumable items that are things used up by consumption. The borrower is obligated to return the same amount of the same kind and the quality as what was loaned. And this loan can be gratuitous or no interest is charged, or with interest, to which the lender charges interest on the loaned amount. Next, we have also obligations of the lender. He or she must deliver the loaned items as being cited by Article 1934, that he or she must deliver the agreed upon item to the borrower. So the lender must also bear expenses of delivery, that under Article 1935, unless otherwise agreed, the lender bears the expenses of delivering the loaned item. On the other hand, there is also obligations of the borrower, to which the borrower must use the loan properly. Under Article 1936, there further cited that the borrower must use the loaned item for the agreed upon purpose or for a purpose consistent with its nature. Then also the borrower must take care of the loaned items under Article 1937, that it is his or her duty to take reasonable care of the loaned item and avoid damage. So the borrower must also return the loaned item. Obviously, under Article 1939, that upon the loan's maturity or end date, the borrower must return the item or incomodatum or equivalent amount or quality in simple loan. So next we have interest payment under Article 1956, that if the loan involves interest, the borrower must pay the agreed upon interest on time. Then we have terminations of the loan. So we have this maturity date, that under Article 1946, It further states that the loan terminates upon the agreed upon date for repayment. Then we have early termination, that in some cases in the loan agreement might allow for early termination by either party under specific conditions. So what is the importance of having these provisions of loan in the Philippine Civil Code? So it is for clarity of loan agreements that this title establishes clear guidelines for loan agreements, protecting the rights and obligations for both lenders and borrowers that might be encountered or might be practiced or enter into by engineering managers. Then also, it also differentiates the loan types, that understanding the distinction between commodatum and simple loans with or without interest helps ensure proper handling and repayment expectations. So in essence, Title 11 provides also legal framework for loan transactions in the Philippines, proposing less responsible lending practices and ensuring fair treatment for both parties involved. Yet again, as always, being said throughout every provisions, it is advisable to consult with a lawyer when drafting loan agreements, especially for complex loans or those involving significant amounts of money. Moving forward, we shall now be discussing all about provisions concerning deposit. So, Title 12 of Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code dives into the concept of deposit. It is a legal relationship where one person, the depositor, and entrusts personal property to another person, the depositary, for safekeeping, with the obligation of the depositary to return the property upon demand or at a specific time. So we have also types of deposits that under Article 1962, there exists a ordinary deposit, which is the most common type, and to which the depositary is not authorized to use the deposited property and must return the identical item entrusted to them. There also exist special deposits under Article 1964, to which the depositary is authorized to use the deposited property or the usually money in a specific way, but must return an equivalent amount of the same kind upon demand or at a specific time. So also, another type of deposit is deposit by pledge. So under Article 1994, this special type of deposit used as security for a debt, that the depositary can only sell the pledged property if the debt is not repaid. Next, also we have the obligations of the depositary. So the depositary must take care of the deposited property, that under Article 1963, they must exercise due diligence in caring for the deposited property, like taking measures to prevent loss or damage. They must also return the property, that under Article 1965 stated that they are obligated to return the deposited property to the depositor upon demand or at the agreed upon time, in the same condition it was received, except for normal wear and tear. So, on the other hand, there are also provisions citing the obligations of the depositor, to which the depositor must pay storage charges. Under Article 1967, if the deposit is not gratuitous or without payment, the depositor must pay any agreed upon storage charges to the depositary. Also, they must reimburse expenses that under Article 1968, the depositor must reimburse the depositary for any reasonable expenses incurred in caring for the deposited property. So, discussing termination of deposit, demand by depositor under Article 1965 states that the depositor can generally demand the return for their property at any time unless a specific return date was agreed upon. Also, the end of deposit term under Article 1965 states that if a specific return date was set, the deposit automatically terminates on that day and the property must be returned. Next, the fulfillment of secured debt under Article 1998 further states that in a deposit by pledge, the deposit is returned to the depositor once the secured debt is fully paid. So, importance of the Title 12 or the provisions under deposit is for safekeeping framework, that this title provides a legal framework for deposit agreements, ensuring that the depositor's property is safeguarded and returned according to the terms of the deposit. Then also for clarity of responsibilities, that understanding these provisions clarifies the expectations and obligations of both depositors and depositaries. Now, in conclusion, this Title 12 of the Civil Code establishes a legal foundation for deposit transactions in the Philippines. That the framework promotes trust and security when entrusting personal property to another property for safekeeping. Yet, engineering managers are encouraged to consult also with a lawyer, that is advisable for complex deposit agreements or situations where legal dispute might arise regarding the handling or return of the deposited property. Next, Title 13 discusses about concepts of aleatory contracts. So, Title 13 of the Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code deals with the aleatory contracts, which are unique arrangements where performance by one or both parties depends on the occurrence of an uncertain future or event. So to break down all these concepts and provisions under Title 13, we have the elements of aleatory contracts. So the first element is the uncertainty of performance. It is a key element that in the dependence on a future event that may or may not happen. This uncertainty can be due to chance like winning a raffle or natural phenomena like harvest depending on weather conditions. Another element is the risk sharing, that both parties involved accept a degree or risk in an aleatory contract. One party might gain significantly if the certain event happens in their favor, while the other party might gain nothing or even lose something. Next, we go to the types of aleatory contracts. So we have insurance, that under Article 2002, it is an agreement where one party, the insurer, promises a benefit to another party or the insured in case of a specific uncertain event like fire or illness in exchange for a premium. Next, we have life annuity. Under Article 2061, they're cited that one party or the annuitant reserves a fixed periodic payment or annuity from another party or the obligor for a certain period or for the lifetime of the annuitant. Next, we have the gambling contracts under Article 2003, that these are generally recognized as aleatory contracts, although gambling regulations might impose specific restrictions. So what are the important considerations when it comes to the Title 13 or aleatory contracts? First, we have legality. Aleatory contracts are generally valid, but some exceptions exist, like gambling contracts that might be restricted or even prohibited depending on the specific circumstances. Good faith, or both parties are expected to act good in good faith and disclose any relevant information that might affect the other party's decision to enter into the contract. And then we have risk allocation, to where the aleatory contracts often involve significant risk for one or both parties. It is crucial to carefully understand the potential outcomes and risk allocation before entering such agreements. Now, this Title 13 or aleatory contracts further provides a legal framework for recognizing the validity of such contracts and outlining essential principles for their formation and enforcement. It also promotes risk um, sharing arrangements that these aleatory contracts allow for risk sharing agreements benefit both parties in situations where future events are uncertain. So in essence, Title 13 sheds light on aleatory contracts existing in the Philippines. So it establishes a legal foundation for these unique agreements while emphasizing the importance of fair dealing and responsible risk assessment for all parties involved. Yet, should there be engineering managers who might involved or involved encounter or enter into a aleatory contract, they must consult a lawyer before entering such a contract, that it might involve complex terms and significant financial risks as well. So now we shall also discussing about Title 14, that concerns compromises and arbitrations. Now, Title 14 of Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code covers two distinct methods for resolving disputes outside of court: compromises and arbitrations. So to break it down, um, we go now first to compromises under Articles 2004 to 2039. So, as being defined, compromise is an agreement between two or more parties to settle a dispute amicably by making concessions to each other. Essentially, both sides giving up something of value to reach a mutual agreeable solution. So, keep some key points to remember, most especially by engineering managers once or should they encounter this two distinct methods for resolving disputes is one for voluntary. So compromises must be entered into freely and without coercion. Next is form. Compromises can be written or oral, but a written agreement is advisable for clarity and future reference. And the last one is for effect, that a valid compromise extinguishes the original cause of action and creates a new obligation based on the agreement's um, terms. So, choosing between a compromise and arbitration. So, compromise is a quicker and less formal option suitable for resolving simpler disputes where parties are willing to come to a mutual understanding. On the other hand, arbitration is a more structured process with a binding decision, ideal for complex disputes where a neutral and expert opinion is desired. Now, with these arbitrations under Article 2040 to 2067, It is defined as the involvement submitting a dispute to a neutral third party or the arbitrator who makes a binding decision how to resolve the conflict. Yet this decision is called an arbitral award. So that is generally enforceable by a court. So some key points we might want to um, remember when we encounter arbitrations is the arbitration agreement, to which the said written agreement that needed to submit a dispute to arbitration is crucial. Though agreement should outline the subject matter of the dispute, the selection process for the arbitrator, and the rules governing the arbitration proceedings. So when we say arbitrator selection, it is when the parties can mutually agree on an arbitrator or follow a process outlined in the agreement to select a qualified and impartial um, individual. So the last one, the binding decision, the arbitral award is generally binding on both parties with limited expectations for challenging the award on grounds like fraud or procedural irregularities. Now, this Title 14, which talks about the compromises and arbitrations, are important for alternative dispute resolution or ADR, that it promotes the use of ADR mechanisms like compromise and arbitration as an efficient and potentially less expensive alternatives through to traditional court litigation. Furthermore, flexibility also offer parties more control over the dispute resolution process compared to court proceedings. So to conclude, um, Title 14, Compromises and Arbitration, provides a legal framework for such processes in the Philippines. That understanding this option empowers parties to explore alternative ways to settle disputes outside of court, potentially saving time and resources while achieving a satisfactory um, resolution. Yet to determine the most suitable approach for a specific dispute, should engineering managers might be encountering it, it is advisable to consult a lawyer to ensure a legally sound agreement for either compromise or arbitration. So the next one we shall be talking about Title 15 of the Book 4 in the Philippines Civil Code, which dives into the concept of guarantee. That is a legal agreement where one person, the guarantor, promises a creditor to fulfill the obligation of the principal debtor in case the debtor fails to do so. So to break down all the key points regarding this concept of guarantee in under the provisions cited in the Philippine Civil Code, we have the elements of a contract of guarantee. So we have three parties. So a guarantor, a creditor to whom the guarantee is made, and a principal debtor whose guarant obligation is guaranteed. We have also the promise to fulfill the obligation. There cited the guarantor that agrees to be held responsible for the debtor's obligation if the debtor defaults. Next, we have the types of guarantees. Now, this comprises of two types. First, the solidarity guarantee under Article 2041, in which the guarantor becomes jointly and severally liable with the principal debtor. That further means that the creditor can demand payment from either the guarantor or the debtor or even from both. Second one is the simple guarantee under Article 2044 that the guarantor is only liable after the creditor exhausts all legal remedies against the principal debtor and fails to collect the debt. Now also the guarantor has also obligations to fulfill that under Article 2041 the guarantor must fulfill debtor's obligations. So if the guarantor's liability is triggered due to the debtor's default, they must fulfill the debtor's obligation to the creditor. Next one is they have the same rights as debtor. That Article 2056 declares that the guarantor who pays the creditor has the right to be reimbursed by the principal debtor and can assert any defenses that the debtor could have raised against the creditor. On the other hand, there are also the rights of the guarantor, to which includes notice of default, that under Article 2051, the guarantor has the right to be notified by the creditor about the debtor's default before their liability is triggered. And also the benefits of the debtor securities is cited under Article 2052 that the guarantor can benefit from any securities held by the creditor for the debtor's obligation like a collateral. So, what are the terminations of a guarantee under the Philippine Civil Code? So, there cited the extinction of main obligation under Article 2065 that if the principal debtor's obligation is extinguished, for example, through payment or fulfilled condition, the guarantor's liability also ends. There also cited a release by creditor that under Article 2066, the creditor can release the guarantor from their obligation at any time. So what are the importance of these provisions of guarantee under the Philippine Civil Code? So one is for the security of credit transactions, that it further guarantee agreements provide creditors with additional security by ensuring that they can recover their debt even if the principal debtor defaults. And it also further clarifies responsibilities, that understanding these provisions helps define the obligations and the rights of all parties involved in the guarantee agreement. So in essence, this Title 15 or guarantee of the Civil Code uh, further establishes a legal framework for guarantee contracts in the Philippines. So, engineering managers must be aware of that this framework protects the interests of both creditors and guarantors. Guarantors should they be become one of those either creditor or guarantor by outlining their rights and obligations. Yet it is always recommended to consult a lawyer when drafting a guarantee agreement, especially for complex transactions or those involving significant financial risks. So moving forward, the Title 16 of the Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code tackles three important concepts used as security for loans: the pledge, the mortgage, and the anticrisis. So to further synthesize all of these, um, we have first the pledge, which are under Articles 2098 and 2146. So the concept of a pledge involves delivering personal property, the pawn, to a creditor as security for a debt. The creditor holds possession of the pawn until the debt is repaid. So some key points engineering managers might be aware of when encountering a pledge is the possession by creditor, to which the creditor takes physical possession of the pledged item. The return upon payment, to which the creditor must return the pawn to the debtor once the debt is fully settled. And the right to sell, or in limited cases, that in some cases like perishable goods, or if the debtor defaults, the creditor may be all able to sell the pawn to recover the debt. On the other hand, we shall be talking about now is concepts concepts related to mortgage under Articles 2126 to Article 2146. Now, the concept of a mortgage creates a lien on real property, either land and buildings, or either land or buildings, as security for a debt. So the debtor retains possession of the mortgaged property, but the creditor has a legal claim on it, even if the debt is not repaid. So some key points: the lien of a real property relates to a mortgage creating a specific right against the property, not the possession. Then the foreclosure process, that if the debtor defaults, the creditor can initiate a foreclosure proceeding to sell the property and recover the debt. Then the last one is the different types of mortgage, such as fixed rate mortgage and adjustable rate mortgages, with specific terms regarding interest rates and repayment schedules. So now we shall now be discussing under Title 16 is the anti-crisis under Articles 2147 to 2154. So the anti-crisis is a special kind of security where a creditor takes possession of a real property belonging to the debtor. So the creditor can then collect the rents or fruits produced by the property and apply them towards the interest on the debt. So some key points um, include the creditor taking possession, to which the creditor possesses the real property and enjoys its benefits such as rents or fruits, and applied towards interest, defined or further states that the collected rents or fruits are offset against the interest on the debt. And the last one is not applied to principal, which, unlike foreclosure, anti-crisis does not directly reduce the principal amount owed. So the importance of Title 16 further um, includes securing the security of loan agreements, to which these concepts provide creditors with security for loans by allowing them to claim pledged items or real property if the debtor defaults. Another one is to protect debtors, as it outlines the rights and limitations for creditors regarding the pledged or mortgaged properties, safeguarding debtors from unfair practices. Now, to conclude, this Title 16 provides also a legal framework for pledge, mortgage, and anti-crisis in the Philippines. That understanding these concepts safeguards both creditors and debtors in loan transactions by establishing clear rules regarding securing debts and recovering them in the case of a default. So now we shall now be proceeding to Title 17 of Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code, which deals with extra-contractual obligations, to which these obligations arise not from a contract but by operation of law. So in simpler terms, these are obligations imposed by law due to certain acts or events even if there's no prior agreement between the parties involved. So there are types of extra contractual agreements or obligations as being cited under the Philippine Civil Code. First of which are quasi-contracts under Articles 2147 to 2172. So these obligations arise from lawful voluntary acts that give rise to a juridical relation akin to a contract, even without a formal agreement. So they are founded on principles of justice, equity, and good conscience. Examples of it include negotiarum gestio under Article 2147, which states that managing another's property without their consent but for their benefit. So the manager is obligated to account for the property and its fruits. The second one is solutio indebiti. So under Article 2154, unjustified payment or delivery of something when there was no right to demand it. The recipient of is obligated to return what was unduly received. So the next concept is the delicts or the act of or omission punishable by law under Articles 2173 to 2214. So these obligations arise from acts or omissions penalized by law, causing damage or injury to another. They are further characterized into crimes under Article 2176, which are acts punishable by the revised penal code where the offended party has a right to be indemnified for damages caused by the crime. Then the quasi-delicts or the culpable acts or omission under Article 2177, which are acts or omissions causing damage to another, arising from negligence, imprudence, or lack of skill, but not punishable by the revised penal code. Then another concept is the obligations arising from law under Article 2176, to which defined as the obligations that are imposed directly by specific laws or regulations, even without a contract or a delit. So what are the importance of having these Title 17 extra contractual obligations provisions under the Philippine Civil Code? First, it promotes fairness and equity. That this title ensures that proper people are held accountable for their actions even there's no formal agreement when such actions cause harm or damage to others. Then it also provides remedies for harm that understanding these provisions empowers those who suffer harm to seek compensation or restitution through legal means. So in essence, the Title 17 of the Civil Code serves as a safety net that it establishes legal obligations that arise outside of contracts to ensure a basic level of fairness and accountability in various situations. So yet again, as always, consulting with a lawyer is highly recommended if an engineering manager believes they have an extra contractual obligation or if they have been harmed by the actions of another person. So the Title 18 under Book 4 of the Philippine Civil Code serves as the foundation for understanding damages within the context of obligations and contracts. Now, to break down the concept of damages, so under the Philippine Civil Code, they're cited the damages refer to the monetary compensation awarded to a party or the injured party who has suffered a loss or injury due to the fault of another party or the obligor. So, this compensation aims to restore the injured party as much as possible to the financial position they would have been in if the breach of obligation or unlawful act hadn't happened. So to further explain the damages under Title 18 of the Philippine Civil Code, there's explained and discussed the kinds of damages under Article 2199, to which we have an actual or compensatory damages, which represent the actual loss or injury suffered by the injured party. That includes medical expenses, lost income, property damage, other expenses directly related to the harm caused. Next, we have moral damages, to which are awarded to compensate for the mental anguish, suffering, emotional distress, or social humiliation experienced by the injured party. So, moral damages are not based on actual expenses, but on the severity of the emotional harm. Next, we have the exemplary or corrective damages, to which are defined and awarded to serve as a punishment for the wrongful act of the obliger and to deter similar acts in the future. So they are not intended to compensate the injured party directly. Next, we have the nominal damage, to which defined as the small amount of money awarded when a legal right is technically violated but no actual harm is suffered. So what are the proximate cause under the Article 2199? So under the Philippine Civil Code, they're cited the obliger is only liable for damages that are the proximate cause of their breach of obligation or wrongful act. Furthermore, the proximate cause refers to the direct and natural consequence of the act or omission that caused the injury. Under the Title 18 also discussed about inculpable breach under Article 2201, to which in some cases an obliger may be liable for damages even if they were not negligent or at fault. This can occur in situations where the law imposes strict liability regardless of the intent. So Title 18 presents its significance through providing basis for compensation, that it establishes the legal basis for awarding damages to those who have been wronged, and also the deterrence of wrongful acts, that potential for damages can discourage parties from breaching obligations or committing unlawful acts. So in conclusion, this Title 18 of the Civil Code serves as a critical guide for understanding and claiming damages in the Philippines. It further outlines the various types of damages available, the principles of awarding them, and the obligations of the party causing the harm. So consulting with the lawyer, again, is highly recommended if an engineering manager have suffered damages due to a breach of contract or a wrongful act, as they can help um, one determine the type and amount of damages they may be entitled to claim. Then for the last one, the Title 19 of the Book 4 in the Philippine Civil Code tackles concurrency and preference of credits. Now, this title focuses on situations where a debtor owes money to multiple creditors and there are insufficient funds to pay everyone in full. So, to break down the key points under Title 19, we shall now be discussing about multiple creditors, to which The title applies when a debtor has a multiple outstanding obligations to different creditors. There also cited the insufficient funds as being defined the key scenario when the debtor's assets are not enough to settle all the debts owed. Now, for the preference of credits under Article 2241, the Civil Code establishes a hierarchy or order of importance for settling debts in such situations. Therefore, creditors are not necessarily paid on a first-come, first-served basis. So, to provide a simplified ranking or higher numbers takes priority. So, we shall now be tackling preference of credits under Article 2241 again. So, under preferred credits, these are debts with a legal right to be paid first from the debtor's assets. So, it includes expenses of administrating the insolvency proceedings, taxes, wages of work for a limited period, claims secured by pledge or mortgage up to the value of the pledged or mortgaged property. Then there also discussed ordinary credits, to which are unsecured debts that don't have any special right or of preference. They are paid after preferred credits, but only if there are sufficient remaining funds. Now for concurrent credits under Article 2242, when dealing with ordinary credits or unsecured debts of the same rank, they are generally paid proportionately based on the amount owed to each creditor. So if there are still insufficient funds to pay all ordinary creditors in full, they share the remaining amount proportionally. So the importance of Title 19 further exemplifies and states that orderly debt settlement establishes a clear order for settling debts when a debtor has multiple creditors and insufficient funds, and also to protect certain creditors that by prioritizing preferred credits, the law ensures that essential expenses and certain claims are addressed first. So in essence, Title 19 provides a framework for handling situations where a debtor cannot pay all their creditors. So it ensures a fair and predictable process for debt settlement, prioritizing certain claims while recognizing rights of all creditors involved. So again, an engineering manager can consult a lawyer as always being recommended for debtors facing insolvency and for creditors seeking to understand their rights and priorities in debt recovery situations. So that concludes my report regarding the pertinent provisions under the Philippine Civil Code that tackles properties, obligations, and contracts, etc. Thank you.